Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to our webinar on gambling, social influencing and responsible leadership. My name's Julie Whittaker, and I'm the CEO of the IRL, which is the Institute of Responsible Leadership. And so I will just say a few words about that before I introduce you to our distinguished panel. So the Institute for Responsible Leadership, or the IRL, as I will refer to it, it's endorsed by the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, UNITAR. It's a not-for-profit organization, and what we really try to do is just make the world a better place. And when I say just, I mean we can contribute in our small way to doing that. So responsible leaders in both the public and the private sector need to treat all stakeholders, whoever they may be, with integrity to ensure the issues of sustainability, ethics, the wider public interest are best addressed. And the IRL do this in a number of ways to achieve these particular aims. We offer bespoke courses, training, seminars, mentoring, coaching. We can support research into responsible leadership. And we also offer accreditation to organizations, both in the public and the private sector, based on a review of their leadership. We welcome members and we charge a one-off fee so that they can become part of this particular organization. We offer the one-off fee of £75 and obviously use discretion with middle and low income countries. We offer webinars, which we are part of today, on various different themes. And we particularly address the webinars because when we were all living through COVID, this is a way that we could all still communicate. So I'm absolutely delighted today to be chairing this particular webinar. But before I introduce our panel, I would like to hand over to Alex Mejia, who's the Director of Division of People and Social Inclusion in UNITAR, who's been the most fantastic support for the IRL since we started. So I would like to hand over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Julie. I hope you can hear me.
I can, thank you.
Excellent. I am traveling as we speak, and I must start by apologizing because I don't have access to a camera, but I do have access to all the information that has been put together for the organization of this important event. Particularly, I would like to begin by expressing my appreciation to the IRL. The Institute is indeed something that we appreciate and admire at UNITAR, and is something that I recommend to everyone, just to echo your words, to partner with, to get to understand better what is it that the IRL is doing, because we need more, not less. We need more efforts to build the concept of leadership proper, and particular responsible leadership. Now, as per the seminar today, I want to say on behalf of UNITAR that this is indeed a most important topic. Gambling, social influencing, and responsible leadership requires that society analyzes it and understand that better. I thank in advance Mr. Adrian Sladdin for taking over as soon as I finish as our keynote speaker, and also all untrusted colleagues of ours, or former colleagues, Sebastian Hofbauer, whom we also cherish at UNITAR. He's still related to the United Nations. We are missing him, and our colleague Laura Rojas-Uribe, who also was part of our team. Now, allow me to share just a couple of ideas, always from the perspective of what constitutes leadership particularly responsible leadership when it comes to progress in society, when it comes to the Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, when it comes to particularly the implementation of the Sustainable Development goals around the world. So I believe that in doing so, in building up to the year 2030, we need to discuss the potential impact of every particular industry. And this industry that occupies us today is very important for the well-being and the advancement of individual societies as a whole, and of course, the sector proper. So the sector that, allow me to share some things in more detail, but gambling and gaming industries as a sector, they do contribute to society, millions of jobs, a lot of technology development, and of course, also bring inherent risks, particularly for the youth, when it comes to abuse of its services, when it comes to unethical commercial and promotion practices, when it comes to addiction, and so on. So we are to establish the need for a proper balance. While society appreciates this industry, the taxes that the industry pays is indeed very important, particularly for some local governments, but also for federal and national governments. So there are very many things that we can brought to the attention of society when we talk about gambling and gaming and the sector itself, but also several things that are less than desirable. So in that sense, I would also like to say that this society of ours, in the way we behave, our life face-to-face and on the day-to-day, but also online, bring these issues to the forefront. 20, 30 years ago, this industry, at least the gambling one, that has existed for centuries, was basically something that you would do on the day-to-day. Now it's face-to-face every day. Now it's mostly online. If you look at the statistics, you see that online communities, online products, online behavior has some advantages again, but also some challenges. And then if you come to gaming, this is rather new for a few decades only, and indeed has generated a pandemic within the pandemic, particularly during the COVID time, of addiction to these products and websites and the like. So in trying to explain to all why the United Nations will remain concerned and attentive on how to encourage self-regulation within the industry, how to encourage proper regulation from national, federal governments, but also at the subnational and local level. I would like to postulate that the concept of responsible leadership remains at the core of what should happen in the years that will come to us. And particularly, allow me to go back to that. I don't want it to be just an idea that passed over our heads, and I know the keynote speaker will be addressing some of it. Youth. The responsibility of society as a whole is to nurture youth in the proper way, to protect youth in the proper way, and indeed help them to become the people that will actually bring to life a better society for the rest of us. So I will, to conclude, because this was just a simple introduction, to say that the United Nations and UNITAR welcome very much this topic, and again, that we thank the IRL, the Institute for Responsible Leadership out of London, for putting it together. I simply would like to conclude by saying that it is also imperative that we acknowledge and study, do some research on the potential risks associated with excessive gambling and gaming, including, as I mentioned in passing, addiction, but also financial hardships, mental health issues, social isolation, and so on. The broader social impact is still under review. We need to understand it better. But we do know so far that abuses promoted perhaps by unethical actors within the industry, because every industry will have the vast majority of actors that are to be respected and constructive and positive for society. There are a few that are to be really observed for their unethical behavior. We do know that a negative result is also strained relationships, increased demand on healthcare systems because of these problems, and the potential for exploitation and harm, particularly amongst vulnerable populations. And it's not only the youth that is the main preoccupation that we have at the United Nations, but it's also the aging and so on. Responsible leadership is more than needed to ensure corporate accountability. And of course, we remain here ready to support in the way that UNITAR works. Our mandate is to build capacity, to develop skills for things that, again, are related to sustainable development and Agenda 2030, and to support the IRL in that sense, because, again, responsible leadership is as important as urgent for these topics and beyond. So let me now conclude by thanking everyone, thanking each one of the panelists. You have the agenda in front of you, and I wish you all success. Thank you to Dr. Julia Whittaker, Serge Whittaker. Thank you, dear Julie.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much, because I know that Alex has got to travel. So I am now going to introduce our keynote speaker, Adrian Sladdin. Adrian's going to discuss and demonstrate how responsible leadership in gambling and gaming, in the gambling and gaming world, can effectively communicate messages found in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Adrian is one of the founding partners of the 7 Wave Corporation and Training. He's written and developed a lot of innovative cooperative training, and he has worked across many countries, most of Europe, and including China, Pakistan, Nigeria, and also works with us closely in the IRL with various themes with responsible leadership. He is his corporate clients include Ladbrokes, Coral, Lottoland, Playtech, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan, Santander, and so on. And so he is an excellent speaker on this particular topic of gambling and responsible leadership. He will also be talking a little bit about a book that he has participated in about responsible leadership, and I'll allow him to do that. But without further ado, I would like to introduce Adrian, who will explain the format of how he's going to talk about gambling, the gaming world, and responsible leadership. Thank you, Adrian.
Julie, thank you so much for your kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. I realise I've spent 34 years in education now. I started out as a school teacher. I then spent 10 years with an awarding organisation developing teacher training programmes. And for the last 10 years, I've run my own educational consultancy in this space. And believe me, responsible leadership is a hugely important thing in schools and other educational settings. Get it right and you're producing excellent young people who are ready for the future. Get it wrong and you're neglecting your duty towards those same young people in a lot of dangerous spaces. And it was back in December when Julie and I were at Geneva Airport, actually flying back from the book launch that we've had, when we agreed that a panel on young people and risky behaviour would be a really interesting thing to put together. I'm delighted that 6 months down the line, here we are with a range of talented people who will talk about a range of these different things. I myself am going to talk about gambling, as Julie noted, and it's an interesting thing. I'm the world's least interesting gambler. I've never even bought a lottery ticket. I spend frequent amounts of time in casinos without buying a single chip, just for the sake of observation. And I think apart from a trip to the racecourse once, I've not put any money on the back of a horse. So why am I involved in this space? What would bring me to a niche area, you might argue, like gambling? Well, the truth is that I was introduced about 8 years ago to a man called Lee Willows. I didn't know Lee Willows. It was a mutual friend who brought us together. Lee had spent the last 2 years in the casinos of Leicester Square. He'd not been a gambler before, but he'd gone there one rainy day when something else wasn't happening, and he put his first coin in the slot of his first fruit machine. And within 5 spins of the machines whirring round, he had won £5,000, a surprisingly large amount of money, and fatally an early win in a career. You know psychologically where we're going with this story. Lee decided to spend more time in the casinos, and he was there morning, noon and night, as you can do with casinos. And in the end, he managed to get his way through £500,000. He would actually sit there with 3 fruit machines simultaneously playing. The casinos would bring him food and drink, so he didn't have to go away and bother himself about those things. They're very kind in casinos. And by the time I met him, he'd blown all his savings. He'd gone through 4 credit cards, 37 payday loans, and finally he had stolen from the charity of which he was chief executive. He went through a judicial process. He narrowly escaped going to jail. He also narrowly escaped committing suicide because somebody happened to ring him at the right time of the right day. And so Lee had an idea around educating young people on the dangers of problem gambling. And when he and I met, he didn't know much about education, and I certainly didn't know much about gambling. And so we spent 6 months talking to anybody who would help us. And that's why I hang out in casinos. And that's why I went to betting shops. And that's why those names that Julie read out, like Ladbrokes and Lottoland, are people that I actually work with. I tell them about safer gambling. And what did we do? We created a great education program. We actually brought teachers to the Hippodrome Casino to see in situ, what does gambling look like? Because like me, they had no idea. And we created from not very much, a really successful charity called YGAM, the Young Gamblers Education Trust, which still exists to this day. But I've majored ever since then in my own work on young people and gambling. And I wanted to tell you a little about the background to what's going on. Is it a big problem? Is it something we should be concerned about? Is it something that schools should be training about? To which the answers are yes, yes, and yes. I'm going to start this afternoon, though, with a little video clip. I've had to go back to the source of YouTube to get the volume loud enough for you this afternoon. And I'm going to play you a little extract from The Simpsons. I'm sure many of you, if you have children, will know about The Simpsons. And in this, Lisa is going to play poker. Now, apologies for the subtitles. I'm certainly not understanding what they say at all, but hopefully the volume is good. And we'll just play a little couple of minutes so you get the feel of Lisa Simpson and gambling.
I've got a pair of aces. Don't. Oh, and lucky please. Everything.
We can all hear you. Please log off.
This is the worst thing that's ever happened to me. Oh, man, this is priceless. I can't keep it up. You've still got a college fund. What are you talking about? I'm Sideshow Bob. Listen, after I won, the website found out we were both under 18, so we're back to the original 5,000.
Shame. Shame.
Did you give the money back to the people who lost it?
Goodbye.
I'm sorry, I couldn't help you.
All right. I hope you got a feel for Lisa losing all of her money. And it's interesting, of course, they were playing illegally online. And one of the key aspects of young people trying to get into gambling is very often they use somebody else's identity, or they try and find a way of circumventing the system to play games, which obviously they're not allowed to. So let's go back to my PowerPoint. Let's try and see if that will actually now come up. I'm just hopeful that you can see a large scale version of this, and I'm going to play from the current slide. I hope. Good. So here we are. When I talk about young people, then we're looking at fairly much the demographic of 14 to 25-year-olds. Not a lot of gambling goes on before 14. And by young people, we do want to look at those as well who actually are gambling in the legal sphere, but maybe finding it also problematic. So what's the news then? Where are we? Well, I went to look for the latest data from the UK Gambling Commission, I have to say that this is true, not just for the UK, but pretty much globally in terms of the references that are made here. And you can see that 31% of 11 to 16-year-olds spent their own money on gambling. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, I'm not going to read out every slide to you. Don't worry, folks. You can read faster than I can. But a lot of it is what we used to call friendly betting, or it's legal betting. So you might remember when you went to the seaside, you used to play on those slot machines at the end of the pier. Those are still very much available. You can do that all day long. You can do the grab machines. The local fair has just been to my park, and it's full of little kind of places where you can gamble if you're a child. Do you remember also we used to bet on friendly bets, didn't we? I bet you won't do that. I bet you won't do that. So gambling is quite a wide brief when it comes to it. So is it a problem? Well, again, 23% of young people spend their own money on regulated forms of gambling. That's quite a lot of money disappearing into the pockets of businesses. According to a problem gambling screen, which is the DSM, and that's a diagnostic and statistical manual where we actually ask young people, you can see that 2.4% are at-risk gamblers, 27.3% are non-problem gamblers. The big figure in there is 0.9% of 11 to 16-year-olds are problem gamblers. Now, I'm no great data analyst, folks, but I can tell you that that's a very, very big figure if you look at all the number of young people there are in the UK. And that's why we should be concerned about this. And if you've never heard of problem gambling and young people before this afternoon, believe me, it's a vast, vast thing indeed. And we're going to take a kind of deep dive into what it looks like this afternoon. And then we're going to look at the educational solutions as well. Why do we gamble? Or better still, why don't we gamble? My parents didn't gamble. There was one betting shop where I lived where we would never have been seen dead. And there was even a race course that we never went to. I never saw a single horse run. But actually, sometimes it can be that we are living in a house where other people gamble. It could be historical, generational. It could be. Do you remember that day? It was about 30 years ago now, when in the UK, we looked like the rest of the world suddenly because we started the lottery. A lot of European countries have had the lottery for years and years, and I'm sure over in the States that might be true as well. But suddenly gambling was a good thing, and we'll look at the different things that we could have. And as Alex said as well, the arrival of these little beauties, these mobile phones, suddenly gambling was everywhere, wasn't it? Online was available. And in the UK, we even had a gambling bill that allowed us to do all of these things. So gambling suddenly became open and it became attractive. Okay, so some of you out there will be gamblers. Some of you will be smug people like me saying, haha, I do not part with my money. But what's the definition of gambling? Well, I do this a lot with teachers and I do it a lot with the industry. And normally we come up with this kind of definition. Pretty much it's financial speculation. We have to give our money away, don't we? We have to give our money away. It's amazing how much we do. If you look at those scratch cards in the newsagents, you know, £5, £10, £20, £50, quite a lot of money is speculated. What we never seem to understand or learn is that there are unhelpful probabilities. That's a kind way of putting it, isn't it? Of saying they're really bad probabilities. And if you do the mathematics, actually the chances of winning the national lottery in the UK are 1 in 43 million. And I bet where you are, it's not much better. You've got more chance of winning a gold medal at the next Olympics. And we're not even in training yet. Okay, so it's really, really bad. Here's the thing, there are things that gamblers believe, and like my friend Lee Willows, we hope we will win, don't we? We have that, oh, it could just be me moment. And we're told that. However, we are also sentient human beings, and we know in our heart of hearts we will lose. We know ultimately the reason the gambling industry is so rich is that our money is supporting it. Do we learn from this? Well, not often, because mostly we repeat the cycle. And we're going to have a look at different forms of gambling in a second and see how cleverly that's done, how it locks us into that whole psychological process. Okay. So who's doing what? Well, when I used to run this with teachers, it was quite amusing because some of them would tell us what they did and some of them wouldn't tell us anything at all. And you can sit there this afternoon thinking, well, the National Lottery, that can't be bad, Adrian, can it? You know, I'm in it to win it. Could be you, it probably won't. And it gives us, doesn't it, a dream of a holiday abroad, an island with golden sand and maybe a yacht. And it allows us to say goodbye to our commute and our horrible work. And people say, well, that's not a bad form of gambling because we're doing good with it. But interestingly, the National Lottery has a lot of addicts out there, a lot of people who are absolutely addicted to the lottery. They will spend more when there's a big win coming up. And actually, however your lottery works, most people in this country are locked into 6 numbers. And God forbid they should unlock one week, and then those numbers should come up. So psychologically, we're locked in forever. And we do it by direct debit, so we don't have to see the damage we're doing. Scratch cards, wonderful. There's a picture of one. They've become wedding gifts or wedding table kind of ornaments. You know, you go to a wedding, you don't know what to talk about. What would you do with £100,000? Gets the conversation going. Grandma sends them as a present to granddaughter, grandson. And yet, again, we know from experience, this is pretty bad. The casino, I was there only on Saturday, researching. I watched from the balcony and I watched people putting hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds, which disappear inside the table, never to be seen again. But it's romantic, it's sexy, it's cool. Why would a young person not want to be seen at the casino? It's a lifestyle choice, isn't it, gambling? Horse racing I've mentioned, but you try going to a horse race and not putting any money on a horse. It's as boring as everything. A horse beats a horse, beats a horse every time. Surprise, surprise. And the other things that are there, online sports betting. We talked about the older gamblers, young men 18 to 25, they love their sports betting. And now you can bet in multiple ways. You know, you can bet on corners being taken, on VAR results, on everything from being sent off to staying on. Bingo. Remember when bingo was an old ladies game traditionally? It's been reinvented now. You might have heard of bongo bingo. Students are playing bongo bingo. They go for a bit of a rave and then they go for a bit of bingo. It's just money disappearing again, isn't it? So there are loads of things out there. You might say it's almost what's your poison in terms of how you want to lose your money. Okay, so why do young people gamble? Again, I'll just run through this quickly, but risk-taking, as a lot of you will know, and a lot of mention will be this afternoon, you know, young people at 15, 16, 17, they have a higher risk-taking thrill allowance, don't they? They want to take more risks, whether it's gambling, alcohol, fast cars, whatever. And the thrill is also there. Learned behavior, my father does this, my older brother does this, grandma does this, so family history is there. You know, my dad used to go down to the bookies and put the bets on. Winning is seen as a thing, isn't it? And occasionally, like my friend Lee, we win £5,000. And we always talk about winning, but we never talk about losing. Interesting, you know, psychology around that. Peer pressure, everybody else is doing it. Everybody else is breaking into the betting shop. Why don't you? You know, it's always been there, peer pressure, hasn't it? Not just for gambling, but for everything else. And then finally, boredom. This is amazing. You know, when you can't find anything else to do, you can just go on your phone and you can find an online platform where you can gamble all day long. So it's really, really easy. Okay, let's just go through this one. So what's the problem? Again, Alex touched on this before, but the easy availability of gambling now is a real problem. In the old days, at least there was a chance you wouldn't get into the bookies because you weren't 18. But now everything is available. Ready money, again, payday loans were a thing, but actually I've known young people who've borrowed mum and dad's credit card and used that to access that. And let's face it, you know, people probably have more money now. Time rich, particularly during lockdown, we had so much time on our hands, and this whole working from home now allows us to be a bit more flexible. Early history, again, you know, sometimes young people begin gambling quite early on and aren't able to stop that habit because there's been no intervention. Language is interesting. I won't go into it now, but there are thousands and thousands of phrases in English and probably in your languages as well around I bet you. And the number of times I say to someone, oh, it's horses for courses, and then I stop myself because I'm speaking the language of gambling. It's been around for centuries. It's historical, isn't it? And finally, friendly bets, again, they will never go away. We're always going to find some way of gambling. Okay. Student life again. I went to a university very early on with my gambling education hat on, and the chief executive of the student union, he said, "Why have you come here?" He said, "There's no point doing gambling training here. We haven't got a problem." And I said, "Well, you probably have." And I said, "Wouldn't it be better if responsible leadership meant that actually you did do the training and then you wouldn't have a problem?" Sadly, it wasn't a convincing argument for him, but it should be for us this afternoon, because students have full bank accounts, don't they? They get all that money. If you were like me, an English student, you boiled it down to 3 lectures a week. You had all that time available. Nocturnal lifestyle, you can gamble all night. Independent living, mum, dad, or whatever, they're not going to be there to say you can't do it. And of course, when you get to university, you know, mostly you're 18 plus, so it's all legally available. So what are these problems then, folks? Well, here we are. Financial, you know, we burn through that money. Like my friend Lee, we're in debt, and then we chase debt and we get further into debt. And maybe, you know, actually we have to borrow money that we don't have. Time, you know, if you're a school student or you're a university student, you're spending time maybe on something that takes it away from learning. And that's really bad news. Gambling damages relationships. I was talking to a guy yesterday from one of my charities who wants to talk about affected others. Gamblers damage at least 9 other people around them, friends and families, into this space. It's hugely corrosive in that space. Health, again, we'll look in a moment, but health can really be damaged by that, whether it's your mental health or even whether it's your physical health. And again, I'm running a conference in September, which is looking at keeping crime out of gambling. Actually, a lot of gambling is related to crime, again, whereby we need money to support our gambling habits. So the signs of online gaming and gambling, I'm sure Elaine will look at some of this later on, but this is equally true for gambling as it is for gaming, in terms of preoccupation, in terms of fatigue, of staying up all night like my friend Lee, even things like downplaying what you're doing. Gamblers are always in denial. Whereas with addiction around, I don't know, smoking and alcohol and drugs, the signs are fairly evident. Gambling is the hidden addiction. That's what we call it. So I'm coming to the end of my time, so I'm just going to move on to the whole point of this about responsible leadership. What can education offer? It can offer these things in terms of personal, social health, economic education. We can also offer help and advice and practical activities. And the work that I still carry out with schools is based very much around looking at the curriculum and seeing, well, not why do we look at gambling in isolation, but how does gambling actually fit into that everyday curriculum? So English, I talked about the language of gambling already. That's quite interesting, whether it be what the phrases we use or even how the advertising is put out there by the brands. Mathematics, I was a very bad maths teacher, but I do enjoy probability and looking at the odds. And I also know that when it comes to gambling, there's no such thing as luck. It's just a no-brainer, that one. So don't ever think it's going to be my lucky day. Business and economics, I spend loads of my time with the industry. I train the industry. It's a really interesting industry, and it does have some ethics, but also it has a huge commitment to making money. And we need to understand those two twin drivers are never going to meet. One of my new interests is around cognitive functions. How does the brain function with regard to gambling? How does episodic memory contribute to our gambling? How does our reaction time preoccupy our gambling? And science is really interesting in this space. So there is a science lesson there as well. And finally, Julie asked me, is this only about the UK, Adrian? And I said, absolutely not. Although Europe is quite similar in the way it gambles, America is changing. It's only just gone online, but it's had its massive casinos for years and years and years. You just think Las Vegas and what that looks like. But other places like China, the Chinese are the gamblers supreme, and yet there is not a single casino in China apart from in Macau. Australia, they're obsessed with what they call pokies, And if you didn't know, pokies are fruit machines. You get the idea, you're poking a coin into them. So gambling is global, but it's also specific to some particular areas. And like I mentioned before, the ancient civilizations were gambling way before we even thought about this stuff ourselves. Yeah, sure, we've got modern versions of it, but the Greeks, the Romans, ancient civilizations were all doing these things. With my training, how do I get the message across? Do I tell people, do not gamble? This is a bad thing? No, I say, you find out for yourself, actually. Inquiry-based learning, have a look at the odds. Experiential learning, try playing something, even like a card game, and find out why you will lose every time. Research and presentation. How much money is the gambling industry worth? Wow! Should I go and get a job in it? I don't know. Creativity and campaigning. Pick a theme, any theme. You could do something that's controversial. You could do something that's about safeguarding. And finally, discussion and debate. I spend most of my life running panels, running conferences about gambling and its merits and its demerits. And there's room for an argument in there about how we can improve things. We can't ban it. We shouldn't ban it. It will go underground. It will become criminal. And so we have to think about the best way of making it work for our young people. So my solutions, education and awareness. And I'll tell you a little bit about how you can reach me. Teachers and trainers need to be aware of the dangers. Okay, we can't put our head in the ground like my university friend. Young people need to understand both risk and reward. And parents become parents again, right? Parents need to be informed of the dangers and not just say, oh, well, let's see how it goes. So let's have real parenting back again. Julie, I'm just going to put up my email on there, adrian@seventhwavetraining.co.uk. There's also my phone number on there as well. So if you want to talk to me about education, we do it in person. We also do it online. And finally, yes, to come back to the book, here it is, our book on responsible leadership that Julie and I wrote the education chapter on, which is all about looking at your curriculum and making it work for you. And on that note, Julie, I will end my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adrian. And really interesting historical kind of context to that, how we need to be aware. We're not talking about only dangers, although there are dangers there, but how people could be more informed to protect themselves and understand and how to use gambling or betting sensibly. And the consequences of not doing that can be quite devastating. So on that note, I'm going to introduce our next panelist, who is Elaine Uskoski. And several years ago, Elaine faced one of her biggest crises when she learned that her young son was addicted to video gaming. And so she chronicled her experiences in her second book, Cyber Sober, A Caregiver's Guide to Video Gaming Addiction. And she now shares her powerful message and hopes, that the awareness will help others. And so Elaine has been featured by many media outlets, including CTV, W5, CBC's, the National CHCH TV, Wall Street Journals, and CB Radio. So is well versed in sharing her personal experience and how that may be something that people can be mindful of, so that we can face the reality that young people, older people, gambling exists and that can be fun and can be enjoyable, but that there are risks associated that we need to be very mindful of. So without further ado, can I pass over to Elaine?
Thank you, Julie. Oh, there we are. And thank you for having me speak today. In terms of global responsibility, I would like to say, first of all, that first responsibility starts in the home with, regulating gaming time with parents, and their own education, but it doesn't end there. I think that doctors and therapists needing more training, like the Intenta clinical training that's available for gaming addiction, so that they know and are aware of the 9 signs and can start flagging children that are at risk early. And then ultimately the government is responsible in providing legislation to the software developers in order to protect gamers. For myself, I was introduced to the gaming world with my young sons in the late 90s. And for me, and like all parents at that time, I think we were all seduced by technology. It was new and it was exciting. There was a lot of education in it. Let's face it, it was a great babysitter at times so that we could get things done as busy moms. And my boys really gravitated and loved gaming and still do today. I think that gaming is a good thing, despite the fact that one of them has had an enormous struggle with that. And I remember when my youngest was just 4 years old, somebody commenting on how dexterous he was and such great hand-eye coordination at such a young age. And I felt proud of him. Little did I know what that would lead to later on. In 2014, 4 years before the World Health Organization established gaming disorder as an actual addiction, I got an SOS email from my then 19-year-old son who was in his 2nd year of university. He had in his first year come home at the end of the year and said that he'd had a great year at school, that he'd passed everything, and took my husband and I out for a celebratory dinner and paid for it. And we were so happy. But during that summer, I did notice that he was only working part-time. He wasn't looking for a full-time job for the summer. And he was spending an enormous amount of time in his room gaming. I did at one point approach him about it, and he got very angry with me and said, this is my last summer that I have free. I'm in a co-op program, and so I'm either going to be in school or working for the rest of the summers after this. And I just want that 1 year as a break. And against my better judgment, I agreed to let him have that free summer. And it was probably the biggest mistake I made. He then returned for 2nd year, and I started to hear less and less from him. And I started to get this mom kind of spidey sense, gut feeling that something was wrong. I started asking questions because when the odd time that I did see him, he looked like he was losing weight. He had a smell to him that wasn't pleasant. And of course, he said he was really busy. 2nd year was harder than 1st year, and he didn't have time to eat as much. And yeah, I'll take a shower. I just have no time right now. Eventually, he started returning texts at 3 o'clock in the morning. And so I said to him, are you even attending school? You appear to be a bit of a night hawk. And of course, his answer was, I'm up late working on an assignment. So I think because there wasn't a lot of education and a lot of people weren't talking about video gaming addiction at the time, he was able to fly under the radar. And I didn't suspect that was the problem. But on October 31st, 2014, I received an SOS email from my son that was very upsetting. And he had explained that he had not gone to any classes for 2 months, that he was holed up in his dorm room. He was gaming through the night. I later learned that he was gaming up to 16 hours at a time. He would game until he would pass out, and then he would wake up and start all over again. He said that the university had caught up with him. He wasn't a registered student, so he couldn't live in residence unless he attended classes. And he had 3 days or they were going to change the locks on his door. So he wasn't calling to tell me he had a video gaming addiction. He actually thought he had a time management issue, which is very common with gamers. There's a lot of denial. I knew by his email that he was in a very, very fragile state, that he felt an enormous amount of shame for not attending classes. And so I picked up the phone and asked him, what did he need? And he burst into tears and said, I need you to tell me this is going to be okay. I said, we'll make it okay. I didn't know what that was going to look like, but I'm mom. I'm supposed to say those kinds of things. So I got in my car and I drove an hour to the university. And when I got there and he opened the door, I finally opened my eyes. And it was a shocking, shocking moment for me. There stood my 6'2" son, and he had dropped to 127 pounds in weight. He had facial tics. He had tremors. His face, which was normally squeaky clean, was a mess of acne. His hair was greasy and he smelled horrific, and his dorm room smelled horrific. I literally hugged a sack of bones and it was terrifying. I brought him home immediately and we had a long talk in the car on the way home. We had more conversation in our home, and I put the pieces together myself and realized that I thought he had an addiction problem. So I required him to detox, and that was extremely difficult for both of us because he was in such a fragile state. I always feared he might still take his life. I monitored him 24/7. He had terrible headaches. He was more agitated. He felt more depressed. I'd taken all his online gaming friends away from him, so he was grieving that loss. He hadn't engaged and made friends at school. He felt very isolated and lonely. And he was ashamed that he wasn't succeeding at school and he was living at home with his parents again. He did go to the doctors immediately because I was concerned about his health as well. And he was diagnosed with severe anxiety and depression. He opted not to do medication. And because he was an adult, I had to respect his wishes. And so I decided that I would take him to my fitness classes with all the other middle-aged ladies. And thankfully, he agreed to that. And within a couple of weeks, he started to feel the changes in his body. He started to feel proud of himself that he was doing fitness. It did help to elevate his mood and take the edge off. I got him busy. And the doctor had suggested that he see a therapist, and we were lucky enough to see one immediately. It wasn't an addiction specialist in therapy. And so unfortunately, my son was able to manipulate him through 8 weeks of counseling and convince him that he didn't have an addiction. In fact, the two of them came up with a chart that showed where he could fit gaming in when he returned to university for the next semester. I was horrified. But again, he was an adult, didn't really have a lot of control of that. So we sent him back for second semester to catch up on what we learned was the 3 credits he had failed in first year. So that was a lie. He had lost the co-op program. So also needing the summer off was also a lie. So we asked him to go back and get the 3 credits that he lost so that he wouldn't fall 2 years behind. He agreed, he felt ready, and off he went again. Same thing happened to me the first week he was there. I got that gut spidey sense that moms get that something wasn't right. And so the first weekend free, we went to the university to check on him. And as soon as he opened the door, I knew that he had relapsed again. Same symptoms, losing the weight again. The tremors were back. He hadn't showered all week. So I brought him home again. And we had a long conversation about what the issues were for him. He'd been bullied when he was in middle school. He had lacked self-confidence. He also had been in a gifted academic program in high school where he was with a small group and he felt like a big fish in a small pond, basically, and went to university and realized there's a whole lot of kids smarter than him. And he suddenly felt like a tadpole in an ocean. And he didn't feel he had the confidence for the program. And so he gravitated to the gaming to find his community where he wasn't bullied and a place where he felt some sense of success and high achievement, and thus began the addiction. So I asked him, do you still want to remain in university? You don't have to do this. We can come up with plan B. It's up to you. You can do a different program. You can take a gap year. And so he thought about it and he said, no, I really want to do the program. This is my dream. He was studying software engineering and he said, no, I want to do this. And so again, I asked him, what do you need? And he thought about it and he said, I need you to drive me to school and walk me to class until I can do it myself. And so there I was driving my 19-year-old young son to university, literally hand holding him because he was so terrified that if I left him alone in his dorm room, he would continue the gaming. He couldn't control it. We spent 2.5 years of detox, relapse, detox, relapse. He still continued to believe he had a time management issue. He refused to see that it was an addiction. He continued to sneak behind my back. He continued to game when he was at school. I did get him back to the school to student services where I got him some counseling. And he did start working with a therapist at the school. Again, it wasn't an addiction specialist. However, they could talk about the self-esteem issues and build his confidence. And as he started to do better in the program, he started to feel better about himself as well. And then the summer between 4th and 5th year, he was living with his brother in another city. He had a job there for the summer, and his brother had a moment where he had left for 2 days, trusting his brother to not game because he was on board with it as an addiction and wanted to help. He came home early to surprise him and discovered that there he was gaming again. And for the first time in their lives, they had a blow up because they always got along. They were great friends. And his brother told him that he loved him, that he always believed in him, that he had so much potential, and that he was completely throwing it away for a video game. And for some reason, that moment was the moment that made my son wake up. He didn't want to lose the relationship with his brother. And so he started to really look at his addiction. He first stopped playing the multiplayer games online, thinking that was the problem. And then shortly after that, he found himself one weekend playing on a Nintendo, and he was 48 hours later still playing it and realized, okay, this is also a problem. He then switched to phone games, believing that that would be safe for him. And the problem was he would play them secretly and at night, and he would fall asleep with the game still running, and then the battery would run out in his phone, and he wasn't hearing his alarm go off in the morning. It was only his brother waking up for work that alerted him that he needed to get up. And at that moment, he realized if he didn't stop gaming, he would lose all opportunity for a future in his career. And so that was 6 years ago this month that he made the decision to no longer game. We created a recovery program for him where he checks in with us. He's very good about the times where he feels like he's spiraling down and feels tempted. He always reaches out for help. Sometimes he comes home and stays with us for weeks at a time, just till he gets a reset button and feels safe enough to return. He lives on his own. He completed his university degree, and he is working very successfully as a senior software developer. And he has been sober for 6 years now. Sometimes he speaks with me. He's thrilled that his story can help even one other person. And yeah, I'm super proud of him. And so I again state that parents, regulating your children in the home is where it begins, but it is certainly not where it ends. And there's a lot more that the government can be doing to hold gaming companies accountable, and doctors and therapists can get on board and learn more about gaming addiction and what the signs are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elaine, and thank you for sharing such a powerful and personal story, because I'm sure there are a lot of people out there who may know young people or older people with these hidden addictions that may not pick up the signs, just as we all may not have picked up the signs, and how fortunate your son was to have a supportive network around him so that he could recover. Unfortunately, there are many young people out there who don't have that network, and so will rely more on external factors to support them through, hence the need for awareness, training, regulation and so on to support people out there with this particular kind of addiction. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next panelist is Sebastian, and Sebastian has worked with the IRL, and we know Sebastian very well. He is the program manager at the Global Surgery Foundation. And very interestingly, he co-founded the YM 2030, which is the initiative 1 million youth leaders for sustainable development beyond 2030. And it was a unique movement by the youth, for the youth, to drive awareness on young leaders as change makers at this present time. And in 2019, the initiative was officially launched with remarks by the United Nations Assistant Secretary, Mr. Nico Steff. Now, also, I think it's important to say, and Sebastian will enlarge on this particular point, that we're not talking about preparing youth for the future. The youth are now, the youth are today, they are change makers today. So without further delay, I will hand over to Sebastian. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. I'm just going to pull up my slides here. Here we go. Yeah, thank you, Julie, and welcome also from my side to all the participants joining today. Thank you for being here. I really enjoyed the remarks so far by the fellow speakers, Adrian, Alex, and Elaine, and thank you, Elaine, for this very personal and emotional experience you shared and the important work you're doing. And I'm actually very glad about the positive outcome in the end. It's always really a pleasure to join these events by UNITAR and the IRL. As Julie mentioned, we know each other quite well. And I'm actually quite grateful that you are giving youth leadership such a high-level venue at the UN. So thank you very much for inviting me to join today. So Julia has already mentioned this briefly, and many of you have probably heard me say it already, but I would like to emphasize it because I feel it's quite important in framing this short talk I'm giving in the context of today's event. And that is that there is this common misconception that youth are the future, but they're actually not the future. And I think it's time that we stop talking about youth as symbols of futuristic hope, and instead let's acknowledge them as actors of the present who need and deserve to be actively included into society. And actually, I think it's us as a society who needs the youth and their unique contributions. And especially in the context of today's webinar, I think that youth should also be involved when we think about protecting them online. And to finish up with this slide, a key factor behind this development, so youth being, not the future, but the present, is actually how the internet has revolutionized and in some way democratized the way that we lead. And it has actually changed what leadership means today. So today, more than at any time in history, the impact young people are having is tangible, it's real, and it's happening now and not tomorrow. So in this age of online youth leadership, it's not the youth who are the benefactors, but it's society that can benefit from online youth leadership, but only if it is responsible. So for today's topic, and particularly in the context of protecting youth online, it's quite important that we consider a very specific type of leader. And that is a leader who has not received much attention as such, but one who nevertheless plays a very key role in making online spaces safe or unsafe. So just for a second, I would like to invite you to mentally picture a leader. Who are you thinking of? Who are the first persons or the first person who comes to your mind? And I think probably it's quite likely that many of you immediately thought about Greta Thunberg or Malala. And of course, those are really excellent choices. And in many ways, they're actually representing the ideal youth leader, and arguably even the ideal responsible youth leader. And of course, there are such perfect examples because of the amazing work they're doing and the impact they have. But today, I don't want to speak about Greta Thunberg or Malala. So instead, and quite intentionally, I would like to speak about another type of leader, and one that is not normally acknowledged as such, one who could benefit from our help as much as we could benefit from theirs. And that is also true in the context of protecting youth online. So as mentioned earlier, the internet has enabled anyone to voice their opinion and to launch initiatives, campaigns, or products, and to do so without having access to many resources. And if we think about the rise of social media in particular, this goes hand in hand with the rise of this new kind of leader I'm talking about. And of course, I'm speaking about social media influencers. So you're very likely familiar with influencers, and essentially these are people who have built a large network of followers, and in some ways are regarded by these followers as trusted tastemakers in their niche. And of course, anyone can be an influencer. It could be a university professor, it could be a high school student. And at the same time, it's not a coincidence that the young generation is quite heavily represented in this field. So I want to ask another question. Have you ever heard of Emma Chamberlain? And I hadn't heard of her until I started researching the topic a little bit more around a year ago. But trust me that when I say many, many people have heard of her, and when she posts on Instagram today, it's likely that over 1 million people will actually engage with that post. And that means that several more million will actually see that post in their feed. So since we're at the UN here at this webinar, another question is, how many likes do you think Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, gets on a post on Instagram? So when I checked earlier today, he can be quite happy if he gets around 10,000. And of course, that's a joke. I don't think Mr. Guterres should care very much about his likes on Instagram. However, there's something to be said about getting a message out and getting it to the right people. So when we're talking about protecting youth online, this means meeting youth where they are. So I think there's a lot of potential, for example, in recruiting the Emma Chamberlains of this world in our effort to protect youth online. Because not only do they reach incredibly large audiences, they also reach the people who we need to reach. And quite frankly, the UN, for example, traditionally doesn't reach these type of audiences. So in addition to some of the dangers that youth face online and are actually caused by influencers, some of the dangers that youth face online, of course, caused by influencers as well. So, considering influencers as leader is one thing, but we need to ask the questions if there are responsible leaders or not. So in that sense, I'm quite happy to have this opportunity to discuss this topic in today's webinar. So this slide is about why we should partner with influencers. And I wanted to speak a little bit about why influencers could be considered leaders. Indeed, they have shown to have quite similar effects on people's opinion as more traditional leaders. And in the marketing world, you're probably familiar with what is going on there in terms of influencers. They're quite an established force there already, and actually $1 billion business. And it is the fact that influencers are often sharing content that includes everyday challenges and thoughts that makes them to appear more relatable and trustworthy. And this helps build a relationship between the influencer and their follower. And this type of relationship based on, a certain type of trust is actually key for any leader. So if we speak about marketing, the sector has clearly understood the power that lies within influencers. So the marketers are actually able to tap into this potential and produce profits. And profits both for the influencer and the business that works for them. So I think the UN, or actually any social impact organization in general, could do something similar. For example, in helping protect youth online. But in this sector, at the UN, more than in any other, we need really trust-based relationships, and the margin for error at the UN is quite small. And that brings us to an important challenge, namely that not every leader is responsible. So the question is then, if influencers can be considered leaders in the traditional sense, are they what we would consider responsible leaders? Or could they be? Under what circumstances could they be? In the context of today's topic, what is the impact that influencers are having on youth, and how could we leverage that for good? Despite being quite popular and trusted by their followers, overall influencers actually have an image problem. So your first reaction when I say the word influencer at the beginning of this talk was probably negative. And there are actually very good reasons for this. And I'm not even talking about the behavior which could, quite often be considered just annoying. Because influencers are often not acting responsible, the impact on their followers more often than not is simply problematic. Just a week ago, I read about a new study that explored the impact of fitfluencers. So those are influencers in the fitness sector. And people who follow these individuals probably do this because in some way they want to get tips and insights on a healthy lifestyle. But the study found that these fitfluencers are actually more damaged than good in their followers. And that's partly because they share questionable tips or they promote products with no proven benefit. And, in many ways, you could say they're not acting responsibly. And of course, in the context of youth, we know that unrealistic body standards can contribute to body dissatisfaction or eating disorder. So the problem is that there are separate goals between, the influencers in terms of creating income and acting responsibly, and these separate goals can sometimes clash. So this slide is about challenges and how we can deal with those challenges. Some countries have started to introduce regulations aimed at minimizing negative effects from influencers. So for example, in Norway, influencers are now legally obligated to disclose if a post is paid or not. In India, the court decided that influencers cannot make statements with the same freedom available to an ordinary person. And just very recently, a couple of days ago, I read about legislation that is coming out in France that basically forbids influencers from promoting certain products or ideas, such as sports gambling or cosmetic surgery. And then if you think about the tech side, some of the major social media platforms, such as Instagram, for example, they're also starting to take influencer fraud more seriously. So Facebook, YouTube, they introduced disclosure guidelines for posts containing branded paid-for content. And then lastly, on the corporate side, the brands or companies working with influencers, they have also started to tighten the rules around how they engage with these influencers. So basically, there's three challenges in this context. And the first one is the regulation is never enough. And that's especially true in the internet because it transcends governance of nation states. There are always gaps in regulation related to the work of influencers. So for example, if we think back to the example of France, it would be very difficult to make sure that influencers abroad comply with the regulations for an audience that is based in France. The second challenge is the increased scrutiny by industry and governance actually poses a threat even to influencers who may be acting responsibly because they might be losing out on business opportunities or simply be faced with tougher rules. And then the third point is that the negative connotations associated with influencing also risks that brands that are working with influencers will struggle to identify trustworthy partners they can engage with. And of course, coming back to the UN or social impact organization in general, this is a particular important point. So again, with the UN, I think it is a shame that this barrier exists because there are a lot of reasons to partner with influencers. And in particular, in an area such as protecting youth online and protecting them also from the negative effects of influencing. So I believe what we need is a mechanism that can facilitate a trusted partnership with influencers and, on the other hand, the UN or other similar organizations. And in the corporate world, of course, this lack of trust is nothing new. So if you think about businesses, there are governance gaps surrounding some of the negative business externalities. And often there's a similar lack of trust or common language between the business world, the private sector, and the UN. And the good news is, in this world, we have some frameworks that exist to mitigate these effects and indeed facilitate the trusted partnerships between the private sector and social impact organization. So for example, you're all very familiar with CSR, corporate social responsibility, and this has indeed become quite an important part of doing business. And the UN has a mechanism in place to facilitate the dealings with the private sector, and the UN Global Compact is, of course, the most prominent of them. So the UN Global Compact clearly meets a need, which is, again, the creation of trusted partnerships between the UN and the private sector. And I'm quite happy that in his opening remarks earlier, Alex mentioned self-regulation, because we could imagine, a similar mechanism for responsible online leadership, which is designed to help facilitate a new kind of partnership between influencers and organizations such as the UN. So influencer social responsibility, or ISR, could be a self-regulating business model that helps an influencer be socially accountable to themselves, their stakeholders, and to the public. And also, in a similar fashion, it could help protect youth from negative impacts of influencing, and even from the impact of unrelated topics by reaching them with important messages where they are. So very important to highlight here is that, very similar to CSR, I think ISR would really need to be not about charity or philanthropy, but you would need to position it in such a way that it is putting the creation of additional value for all involved front and center. And here's some ideas how this might happen. The number one point here is influencers could reduce business risk and open new markets. Number two, social impact organizations could benefit from influencer outreach. And number three, reducing some of the adverse effects of influencing and unlocking the positive potential within it could benefit society as a whole. So with that, this is my last slide. And I would like to finish with a couple of takeaway points. And first of all, just to repeat again that in the age of social media, youth are not the future, but they're actually actors of the present. Second, influencers have established themselves among the primary opinion leaders on social media, and we should actually, there's good reasons to consider them as leaders in today's age. And third, there are good reasons for organizations such as the UN to actually work with influencers, but at the same time, barriers stand in the way of such symbiotic partnerships. And finally, influencer social responsibility, or ISR, might be a useful framework to overcome some of these barriers by creating value on different fronts. So with that, I would like to finish this short presentation, and I invite you all to think about what some of the principles of ISR could look like. And I look forward to the rest of the event. Thank you so much, Julie.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. And that's a really interesting and important point that you make about young people who are actually young people, but are the influencers today. And we want them to be responsible and understand all of the benefits and risks of social media in its widest sense. I'd now like to introduce Laura Rojas-Uribe, and she is the Director of Innovation of Ninjas in Pajamas, or NIP, as I'm sure she will explain. And this is, a professional organization based in Sweden, and is best known for its counter-strike teams and the world's most legendary exports. And it's pioneered for, it's seen since the inception in 2000. So more recently, Laura has brought consciousness to sustainability through gamification strategies, and wearable tech by leading a digital transformation in collaboration with Nick and the Foundation Innovation Center. So I'm sure Laura will explain this to you in great detail. We're delighted to have her to speak on this panel, and especially we'll be talking about a lot of the benefits and advantages of the world that she can offer. Thank you, Laura.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I want to thank everyone that has spoken already before me. I'm going to make it short like this because I guess everyone has somewhere else to be, something else to do. I'm actually going to start showing a video of what the Ninjas in Pajamas world is. Let me just get that started.
Laura, is there a sound with this?
You can't hear the sound?
No.
Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. Okay, hold on. Let me see what has happened. Let me try it this way. Hold on. Well, you missed out like the best part, so I need to start it again. Can you hear it now? No sound?
No, maybe you could summarize it for us.
I mean, okay, so basically it's a lot of, it's one of the best videos that we have ever made because it compiles 20 years of history, 3 different rebrands and 3 different, like over 200 trophies that we have raised over the course of our history. I mean, I'm so sad that you can't see them. It's so beautiful because it actually shows you like
ninjas.
Well, we can now hear.
You win, you lose, you learn how to manage your emotions, you regroup, you find a way of like creating a little community. Your fans, they become your friends become also your little family. So it kind of becomes a little bit of a more holistic kind of thing. Since everyone has spoken about very concise and precise points on like good things about and bad things about, I'm going to talk about the benefits of gaming. I come from fashion. I had no idea that this world existed before I started to work at Ninjas in Pajamas. Personally, probably like a couple of people like you, I actually thought that people that played video games, because of what I have been told in the media, they were aggressive or they were a little bit like unstable and like you never really know, you hear that like shooters in America go into malls and they're like, yeah, it's because they played San Andreas or like Grand Theft Auto, things like this. I had that perception as well when I started to work at Ninjas in Pajamas. Soon after, when I actually met the players of Counter-Strike, I realized, yeah, they're introverted, but they're also very sweet people. I actually don't even think that any one of our players in the 19 teams that we have all over the world would even kill a fly. And I don't say that lightly. They will probably see the fly and be like, no, I'm just not going to touch it. So that misconception that we have about aggressive games that have like the connotation of being violent, well, it's not entirely true into that, when it fits into that particular segment. One of the really cool things that I thought that I've learned while working in esports is one of the best things that has gaming is that it increases your reaction speed. Some of us are like, well, I don't really need to be quicker. I'm not a tennis player. I'm not like a paddle player, but maybe if you're going to fall, maybe it's quite good to have good reaction times. If you're in a danger situation, you're able to see around you and things that are happening around you. It makes you more aware. So that's one of the really good things that I think that response times has and gaming has. Another interesting thing is being in a team. Most of the games that we play are not solo games. They're usually multiplayer games and games where you have to be with a larger audience and you have matchmaking, whether if it's Counter-Strike, whether it is Rainbow Six, whether it is League of Legends, any of those games require for there to be a team. What happens in a team? You have to talk to each other. You have to be able to interact with each other and be like, well, how about you go left, I'll go right. Maybe you're better with a rifle, I'm better with an AK, or I'm better like going mid lane or taking the jungle. So you obviously have to communicate, and to create that, you need skills, right? Another amazing thing that gaming can bring is learning new languages. I actually, a long time ago, a person worked with us that came from Poland. He learned to speak English by playing video games. He didn't learn English at school. He didn't learn English anywhere else. He learned playing video games. Sure, his English was not a perfect English. Sure, that he had questionable spelling, but he still spoke English, even though he was never taught English at school or like by the normal conduits of it, right? So I don't know if in any opinion of the people that are like sitting with me in this panel, if that is not really, really cool. I mean, probably for teachers, this is another way of interacting with your class. They stimulate creativity. They allow people to have like wild ideas. There's a game, well, there is League of Legends, and then there's Dota, which has endless characters or heroes in the game. You can create and invent whatever story that you want around it. It creates new neural pathways in the brain. So actually, it's really cool to actually sit down and read through the stories that people have built. There's so much fan novels that were made thanks to those two games in regards of each one of the characters. Obviously, when we talked before about team building, we need to talk about leadership. And how do you, because obviously when you're a team of 5 or a team of 3 or a team of 4, you need one person that's calling the shots, because there's obviously different segments that are needed to be successful in battle, so to say. So that is another thing. You create strategic thinking, you create leadership skills to people that either become real leaders, so to say, or you have someone that is taking the information from the leader and actually working with it, like where to go in a map or what side to take. That's another one of a very interesting ways of thinking of cool things that games can do. And then you have obviously critical thinking. If you walk down that path, you might fall and your character is going to die. So maybe don't go there and get shot everywhere. So I think that, sure, there's a lot of dangers in playing video games, but so there is drinking alcohol, going outside your door. There's dangers in everything when it's not done in moderation. Yeah, you need to also educate your children, just like I was taught, maybe don't sit down and drink alcohol all day long. Maybe that's a good idea so you don't become an alcoholic. And I really enjoyed what Adrian talked about the effects of gambling, but also the effects of gaming. Gaming can be very beneficial in many different aspects, but also gaming can be damaging. Of course, as we heard from Elaine, what's her name? So in a way we kind of need to make people aware of that. And that is one of the things that we have worked as well with. We have discussed, there's a lot of discussions in the gaming industry on how to actually make people aware. Don't game 16 hours. Balance it out with other things. Don't stop going to school because that's just dumb. And then afterwards, you're just going to end up with nothing else to do. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about this. I don't know if it gives a bit of an idea of what we do at Ninjas in Pajamas. I mean, we do work with very, very, very young people that are in the ages. I mean, our fan base starts at the age of 14 and it goes up to the age of 45. And we have direct contact with a lot of people.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Laura. And I would like to just sum up by thanking everybody on the panel for all of their contributions. And I think it's important that, as Alex said at the very beginning in his introduction, that there is always a balance of a benefit and a risk. And it's about self-regulation, and it's about awareness, as we've known from a very powerful and personal story from Elaine, and as Adrian has taken through the history of gaming and how that affects us in society now. Sebastian has also really, really raised the point about the fact that youth is today, and we have to live in the society, and the fact that it's a reality that we have social media, we have gaming. There are lots of benefits from it, including, I know that Laura mentioned about team playing and communication and education, but it's also fun. And it doesn't mean necessarily that, you know, we need to be careful to avoid our stereotypes and stereotypical views about, oh, well, you know, if it's violent, then people are going to be violent and so on. There is about self-regulation, it's about education, and above all, it's about that responsible leadership of making sure that we have appropriate safeguards in place for people who are able to use these facilities, especially young or vulnerable adults, or indeed anybody, so that they are protected and aware and it's properly regulated. So I would like to thank you all very much. And if there are any questions, please do email with the email that you were provided with, and I will do my best to get back to you with anything that you want to ask, because it's now coming up to 4:30, so we would not have time to particularly take questions. I have noted the things down on the chat show, but thank you very much for all your fantastic contributions, and really look forward to meeting you again next time. Thank you.